Carter's always trying to attack China with his king. When I got into this war, I had a very clear understanding with the Pentagon. No gun.
On MASH, Gary Burghoff played Radar O'Reilly, the steady presence in the middle of chaos and the quiet glue holding the 4077th together. On screen, he was pure heart. Off-screen, it was a different story. Burghoff clashed with several castmates, and those tensions didn't fade. They piled up. Over time, one feud grew so bitter that a fellow actor openly admitted he hated working with him. So who was this castmate? And what exactly did Burghoff do to push things that far? Join us as we get into all the details. Gary Burghoff as Radar O'Reilly. Gary Burghoff didn't just play Radar O'Reilly, he embodied him. In a show built on sarcasm, exhaustion, and moral fatigue, Radar stood in the middle like a steady heartbeat. While surgeons cracked jokes to survive and commanders improvised authority, Radar kept things moving. Radar was carefully built, layer by layer, into one of the most emotionally loaded figures in MASH. Radar O'Reilly existed long before television audiences met him. He originated in the MASH novels, appeared in the 1970 film, and later became a central figure in the television series. Burghoff was one of only 2 actors to make that rare jump from film to television in the same role, carrying Radar across formats while most of the cast changed. From the beginning, Radar was positioned as essential but underestimated. Not the loudest, not the bravest in battle, but indispensable. The novels paint Radar as a kid from Ottumwa, Iowa, shaped early by loss. His father, already elderly when Radar was born, died when Radar was still very young. Radar once recalled that his father suffered a stroke during a game of peekaboo, a memory both tragic and oddly gentle. After that, it was just Radar and his mother, Edna, holding the family farm together. His Uncle Ed stepped in as a father figure, filling the emotional gaps until his own death years later. That string of losses quietly defined Radar. He grew up fast emotionally, even as he remained boyish in every other way. The show never fully committed to whether Radar had siblings. At different points, he mentioned a younger sister, a younger brother who died young, and later even older siblings. But the emotional through line never changed. Radar behaved like an only child. Lonely, deeply attached, eager to please, and terrified of disappointing authority figures who felt like family. Radar's nickname wasn't just a gag. Within the world of the show, it was treated almost seriously. He seemed to know things before they happened. He appeared beside commanding officers before they called for him. He finished sentences. He heard helicopters long before anyone else. Before the Army, Radar tried the Marines and was turned away because he wore glasses. It was a small rejection, but it mattered. He joined the Army hoping for the Signal Corps, imagining something technical and structured. Instead, he landed at the 4077th. Chaos. In the novels, he volunteered right after high school. On television, he said he was drafted. Either way, the point landed the same. Radar was young. Too young. He was 18 when he arrived, 19 by season 2. And he carried a teddy bear from home like a quiet confession that he wasn't ready for what he'd been handed. That teddy bear became one of the show's most loaded symbols. Played for laughs, yes, but it was also Radar's emotional armor. He slept with it. He defended it. Once claimed it belonged to his brother. The joke worked because the truth underneath it hurt. Radar was a child placed in adult trauma, and the bear was how he survived. In the film, Radar was sharper, more worldly, a clerk who carried passes and scams in his pocket, always ready to work the system. Television softened him, made him sweeter, more naive, but not incompetent. If anything, TV Radar was better at his job. Father Mulcahy once noted that Radar had a terrible start as company clerk. He asked too many questions, slowed everything down, drove people mad. But once Colonel Blake took him under his wing, something clicked. Radar learned fast. He learned how to get things no one else could, learned how to balance Blake's silliness with competence. That's where the heart of Radar really lived. His relationships. Blake wasn't just his commanding officer. He was a stand-in father. The loss of Blake hit Radar harder than anyone. When Radar walked into the operating room to announce that Henry Blake's plane had been shot down, the show crossed a line it never walked back from. Adjusting to Colonel Potter took time. Radar described it like suddenly being with an aunt instead of a father. Different rules, different warmth. But eventually, Radar bonded with Potter just as deeply, if not more. He admired him, protected him, even annoyed him. Like the time Radar fell for a mail-order writing course scam and began padding his reports with flowery language that drove Potter insane. Radar meant well. He always did. Radar's appetite was legendary. He loved the mess hall food when everyone else complained. Drank knee-high grape soda like it was gold. Smoked cigars with the others, even though they made him sick. He wanted to belong. Wanted to be included, even when it hurt. Animals became another outlet. Hamsters, guinea pigs, rabbits, a turtle. Living things he could protect in a place defined by death. For Potter's anniversary, Radar helped rescue a horse that became Sophie, a gift that symbolized everything Radar valued. Care, loyalty, stability. Romance, though, was where Radar always stumbled. He was painfully naive, a virgin, earnest to a fault. He had a fiancée early on who broke his heart. After that, every attempt to connect with nurses ended awkwardly or badly. Sometimes they weren't interested. Sometimes Radar tried too hard. Sometimes he simply didn't know how to be a man yet. Behind the scenes, Burghoff's commitment to Radar came at a cost. He appeared in every episode for the first 3 seasons, but the workload strained his family life. By season 5, he negotiated fewer episodes. Radar went on R&R more often. By season 7, Burghoff was burned out, and he knew it. By season 8, he walked away from the 4077th and never looked back. When Radar walked away. Gary Burghoff stood on the MASH set in October 1979, holding a teddy bear that had become almost as recognizable as his own face, and told the producers he was done. He wasn't asking for more money. He wasn't pushing for better scripts. He wasn't threatening to walk unless something changed. He was leaving because playing Radar O'Reilly, the role that made him famous, was quietly hollowing him out. From the outside, the decision looked insane. MASH wasn't just successful, it was dominant. 30 to 40 million people tuned in every week. Families planned their evenings around it. Radar O'Reilly wasn't just a character, he was comfort. The innocent heartbeat inside a war zone. The kid with the teddy bear and the grape soda who somehow kept the 4077th running, while everyone else unraveled. Burghoff had job security actors fantasize about, and he was walking away years before the show would end. The network didn't understand it. His castmates worried. Fans were about to be crushed. But Burghoff wasn't wavering. He had already paid the price of staying too long. To understand why he left, you have to understand what it took for him to become Radar in the first place. Gary Burghoff was born in 1943 in Bristol, Connecticut, into a family that leaned toward music and art rather than sports or physical dominance. That mattered because Burghoff was born with brachydactyly, a congenital condition that left 3 fingers on his left hand noticeably shorter than normal. In mid-century America, that kind of difference didn't invite curiosity. It invited cruelty. He learned early how to disappear parts of himself. He hid his hand, learned how to angle his body in photos, learned how to let other people talk first, and most importantly, he learned how to excel so completely in other areas that his difference became invisible. He became an accomplished drummer, a gifted wildlife painter, creative spaces where precision and feeling mattered more than symmetry. When he auditioned for the 1970 MASH film, he didn't expect much. Radar wasn't a starring role on paper, just a clerk, a strange kid with near-psychic instincts who could anticipate his commanding officer's needs. But Burghoff didn't play him as a joke. He played him as someone who had learned, from a very young age, that being useful was a form of protection, that if you anticipated people's needs well enough, they might keep you around. Robert Altman saw it immediately and cast him on the spot. The film exploded. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It became a cultural lightning bolt. When CBS decided to adapt it for television in 1972, most of the film cast moved on. Burghoff didn't. He felt Radar wasn't finished yet, that there was something deeper there than a 2-hour film could reach. He became the only actor to carry his role from the movie into the series. A rarity, and at first, the show leaned into comedy. Radar was the farm boy from Iowa, the teddy bear, the knee-high grape soda, the supernatural hearing. The laughs came easily, but the show changed. Slowly, deliberately. It grew teeth. War stopped being a backdrop and started being the point. And Radar changed with it. Burghoff began playing the character as someone quietly absorbing trauma. The teddy bear stopped being a prop and became a lifeline. Radar wasn't childish because he was simple. He was childish because it was the only way to survive what he was seeing every day. Burghoff didn't announce this shift. He let it seep in. In 1977, he won an Emmy, public validation, industry approval, and a deeper trap. Because by then, people didn't see Gary Burghoff anymore. They saw Radar everywhere, all the time. Fans expected sweetness, innocence, gentle gratitude. What they didn't know was that Burghoff himself was none of those things by nature. He was private, serious, introspective, deeply invested in emotional truth. He could be difficult on set, not out of ego, but because he cared too much to fake it. Playing someone so far from himself, 8 months a year, year after year, started to feel like erasure. He later described it as living in someone else's skin until you forget what your own feels like. Meanwhile, his personal life was cracking. His marriage was failing. Fame kept him away from his daughter. When he did have time off, strangers still called him Radar, still wanted him to be that boy. The line between character and self had vanished, and Burghoff could feel himself disappearing inside it. The real breaking point came in season 7. The producers wanted to harden Radar, make him cynical, strip away his innocence as a reflection of prolonged exposure to war. Burghoff fought it fiercely. He believed Radar's entire purpose was to show that gentleness could survive brutality, that softness wasn't weakness, that not everyone had to become damaged to be believable. He won that fight, but it drained him. He realized he wasn't just defending a character anymore, he was defending himself. So in 1979, he told the producers he was leaving. They tried everything: more money, fewer episodes, creative control. None of it mattered. When they asked him why, he gave an answer that stunned them. He said he needed to remember who Gary was before Radar erased him completely. His farewell came in Goodbye, Radar. Over 40 million people watched the episode, and almost immediately, letters flooded CBS. But Burghoff didn't change his mind. Leaving at the height of MASH wrecked his acting career. Casting directors couldn't see past Radar. The few roles he landed echoed the same innocence. His short-lived series, Walter, barely made a ripple. While other cast members moved smoothly into new phases, Burghoff faded from Hollywood entirely. Many assumed he'd failed. What they missed was that Burghoff had simply chosen a different definition of success. He moved back to Connecticut, remarried, painted wildlife, played drums, spent time with his children, lived quietly, intentionally, away from the spotlight that had nearly swallowed him whole. Years later, when asked if he regretted leaving MASH, his answer never changed. He didn't regret choosing to survive. There's something quietly radical about that. In an industry obsessed with visibility, Gary Burghoff chose to disappear. In an environment that rewards endurance at all costs, he walked away. And in doing so, he lived out Radar O'Reilly's deepest truth: that staying gentle in a brutal world is a form of courage. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is leave. What happened between Burghoff and Alan Alda? For all of Radar's sweetness on screen, the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. On the set of MASH, Gary Burghoff and Alan Alda were never close. They worked together. They respected the work. But there was always friction sitting just beneath the professionalism, never loud enough to explode, never quiet enough to disappear. Burghoff was known for his intensity. He didn't coast through scenes or trust that things would fall into place. Every moment mattered to him. Timing, delivery, emotional weight. If a line reading felt off, he said so. If the rhythm lagged, he pointed it out. If the blocking didn't feel honest, he questioned it. Often, he did this without being asked. What began as commitment slowly felt like intrusion to the people around him. That tendency became harder to ignore as the show evolved and Alda's role began to change. In the early seasons, Alda was simply another member of the ensemble. But as MASH grew, he became its creative center. He wasn't just playing Hawkeye anymore. He was writing episodes, directing them, helping shape the show's voice and long-term direction. With that shift came an unspoken expectation. Collaboration still mattered, but authority now lived somewhere specific. Burghoff didn't always adjust to that reality. To him, emotional truth outranked hierarchy. If something didn't feel right, it didn't matter who was directing or who had final say. He spoke up anyway. From Alda's perspective, those interruptions felt like being second-guessed on his own set. From Burghoff's perspective, staying silent felt dishonest. Neither man was trying to undermine the other. They were simply operating on different assumptions about how work should be done. Over time, that mismatch created distance. There were no screaming matches, no public blow-ups, just a slow cooling. Scenes were played. Work was done. But the ease never returned. By the time Burghoff chose to leave the series in 1979, the relationship wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. There was no emotional tether left to stretch. What's revealing is how people talked about it afterward. Alda remained careful and diplomatic. He never publicly attacked Burghoff or fueled the narrative. He acknowledged difficulty without turning it into drama. Others were far less restrained, and that contrast says a great deal. Mike Farrell, who joined the show later and witnessed the dynamic firsthand, once said something blunt to Burghoff: that he could dish out criticism freely, but struggled when it came back at him. It wasn't framed as cruelty, it was framed as truth. And it landed because it put words to what many on the set had felt, but hadn't said aloud. Burghoff wasn't malicious. He wasn't trying to dominate the room, but his intensity demanded space, patience, and emotional endurance from everyone around him. On a short-term project, that kind of energy can sharpen the work. On a series that ran for more than a decade, it quietly strained relationships. Radar O'Reilly was written as the glue that held the 4077th together. Gary Burghoff, behind the scenes, was far more complicated, deeply committed, uncompromising, and ultimately out of step with a system that required flexibility as much as passion. While the tension with Alda was subtle, the tension with Wayne Rogers was not. What happened between Burghoff and Wayne Rogers? From the start, Rogers and Burghoff were opposites. Rogers was relaxed, where Burghoff was rigid. He trusted instinct, rhythm, the natural back and forth of a scene. He liked flow. He liked give and take. Burghoff approached the show almost like a military operation. Timing had to be exact. Continuity had to line up. Blocking had to make sense down to the smallest movement. Nothing was casual. Nothing was left alone. And again, Burghoff didn't keep those standards to himself. He corrected other actors, commented on performances, stepped into rehearsals with notes no one had asked for. Sometimes it came from a genuine desire to protect the show. Other times, it landed as controlling and intrusive. Intent didn't always matter. Impact did. Rogers didn't respond well to that kind of pressure. By seasons 2 and 3, Rogers was already frustrated for reasons that had nothing to do with Burghoff. His character, Trapper John, had slowly begun to fade. Scripts leaned more heavily toward Hawkeye. Scenes centered on Alda. Trapper shifted from being essential to being reactive. The ensemble balance that once defined the show was slipping away. So Rogers was dealing with less screen time, less creative input, and a growing sense that his role was shrinking in real time. Into that tension walked Burghoff, correcting him. That combination made things combustible. According to multiple cast histories and behind-the-scenes accounts, including the complete Book of MASH and later biographies, Rogers openly resented Burghoff's behavior. He felt Burghoff had appointed himself an authority on set, despite not being the lead and having no formal control over production. What might have been tolerable in calmer circumstances became unbearable once Rogers already felt sidelined. One incident has been repeated often enough to become part of the show's darker lore. A 1983 biography of Alda by Raymond Straight described Burghoff as someone who didn't particularly like taking direction, preferring to play Radar exactly as he saw fit. That attitude, Straight claimed, led to repeated clashes, including a yelling match with McLean Stevenson and an especially ugly encounter with Rogers. According to Straight, Rogers became so frustrated during rehearsals that he threw a chair at Burghoff during a scene. Details vary, but the takeaway doesn't. Rogers reached a breaking point where he no longer wanted to engage with Burghoff at all. Straight even noted that Alda later diffused lingering tension in script discussions by joking that crew members should bring Mr. Rogers' chair, please. Unlike others who tolerated Burghoff quietly, Rogers didn't hide his irritation. Once the resentment set in, the relationship never recovered. This wasn't a feud marked by constant shouting. It was colder than that. Distance, withdrawal, a refusal to engage. When Rogers left after season 3, the explanation usually stopped at contracts and creative imbalance, and that explanation is true as far as it goes. But it isn't complete. Personal dynamics mattered. Rogers didn't feel respected, and Burghoff, whether intentionally or not, was part of that equation. After Rogers exited, Burghoff remained, but the reputation followed him. Other cast members later echoed similar complaints. Over time, Burghoff himself admitted he had been difficult to work with, and later apologized to at least one castmate. Rogers, meanwhile, never looked back. He rarely spoke fondly about his MASH years and avoided nostalgia-driven reunions. After leaving, his career didn't collapse. It pivoted. He starred opposite Lynn Redgrave in House Calls, then appeared in I Dream of Jeannie. 15 years later, stepping into a role once defined by Larry Hagman. But acting slowly became secondary. Rogers turned toward finance, where he thrived. He ran his own investment company, became a regular presence on Fox Business News, hosted his own show for a time, built a second career defined by control, independence, and clarity. So when people ask whether leaving MASH was a mistake for Wayne Rogers, the answer is simple: it wasn't. He followed his instincts. He left a situation that no longer worked for him. And in the end, it paid off, professionally, financially, and personally. He truly hated Gary Burghoff. Now, we finally know why. Watching MASH, it's easy to fall for the illusion. The laughter feels easy. The bonds feel genuine. Colonel Blake and Radar move like family. From the outside, it looks like one of those rare sets where everyone must have gone home smiling at the end of the day. But that picture never quite matched reality. Behind the scenes, MASH was under constant pressure. The show exploded faster than anyone expected. Ratings soared. Fame arrived early. And with that came stress, ego, exhaustion, and friction. Cast members began eyeing opportunities beyond the ensemble. Even series creator Larry Gelbart eventually walked away after season 4. One of the earliest and most dramatic exits belonged to McLean Stevenson, who played Colonel Henry Blake. Publicly, his departure was explained as frustration with playing second fiddle to Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. And that was true. Blake was the commanding officer, yet Hawkeye increasingly dominated the show's emotional center. Stevenson wanted more prominence, more recognition, more control. But there was something else simmering underneath. In later interviews, Stevenson admitted that while he generally got along with the cast, there was one exception. The person he worked with the most. The one who stood closest to him in nearly every scene. Gary Burghoff. Stevenson described their relationship as a love-hate one. He didn't deny Burghoff's talent. In fact, he praised it, calling him brilliant and even suggesting Burghoff might have been the strongest actor among them. But talent wasn't the problem. Friction was. Stevenson admitted they butted heads, that sometimes Burghoff was the problem. Sometimes he was. Ego played a role. Pressure amplified everything. Two strong personalities, constantly paired together, trapped inside a high-stakes production that never slowed down. And Stevenson wasn't alone. As years passed, stories piled up. Accounts that painted Burghoff as intense, controlling, and difficult to work with. A 1983 biography of Alda by Raymond Strait described a set where tempers flared behind the camera. According to Strait, Burghoff and Stevenson once got into a full-blown yelling match. Another incident went further. Wayne Rogers, already frustrated with his shrinking role as Trapper John, allegedly became so irritated with Burghoff during rehearsals that he threw a chair at him. Whether every detail is precise almost doesn't matter. The pattern does. Burghoff was intense, exacting. He didn't float through scenes, he corrected people, commented on performances, inserted himself into blocking and timing. Sometimes it came from a genuine desire to protect the show. Other times, it came across as intrusive and exhausting. For actors already feeling sidelined or undervalued, that behavior landed like salt in a wound. What makes it more complicated is that none of this shows up on screen. Radar and Colonel Blake feel inseparable, tender, loyal, almost father and son. Whatever irritation existed behind the scenes never bled into the performances. If anything, the warmth feels even more real in hindsight, knowing how much tension it masked. But subtle traces may have slipped through. Radar is often treated like the camp's irritating kid brother. Loved, but dismissed. Trusted, but rarely taken seriously. He's the butt of jokes. The one everyone talks over. That dynamic mirrored something Burghoff himself may have been feeling. Despite being the only actor to bridge the 1970 Robert Altman film and the television series, Radar rarely commanded the same respect behind the scenes as others who later took on writing and directing power. Burghoff even wrote an episode centered on Radar that never made it to air. As Alda and others gained creative authority, Burghoff remained boxed into his role. Essential, but not empowered. Visible, but not fully valued. By the time Burghoff left the show himself in Season 7, the pattern was clear. Burnout, family strain, a growing sense of being underappreciated, and a reputation that followed him long after he walked away. Over time, Burghoff acknowledged he had been difficult to work with. He apologized to at least one castmate years later. The self-awareness came, but only after the damage had settled. So when people ask who truly hated Gary Burghoff, the answer isn't simple. It wasn't just one man. It was a collection of frustrations, egos, pressures, and personalities colliding inside a show that became too big, too fast. McLean Stevenson felt it most acutely. Wayne Rogers felt it explosively. Others absorbed it quietly. And yet, together, they created something enduring. The irony is hard to miss. A show about camaraderie forged under impossible conditions was itself forged under similar strain. And sometimes, the bonds that look strongest on screen are built on the most complicated foundations behind it. What did Gary Burghoff do after he left MASH? After leaving MASH, Gary Burghoff didn't vanish overnight. He stayed visible, just not in the way people expected. Television was the easiest door to keep open, and for a while he walked through it regularly. He popped up on game shows like Match Game, Tattletales, Liars Club, Hollywood Squares, and Show-Offs. These weren't prestige roles or long-term commitments. They were low-pressure appearances, controlled environments, places where he could show up, do the job, and leave without being consumed by a character again. He took a few acting roles, too. A film called B.S. I Love You, single episodes of The Love Boat and Ellery Queen. Small parts, contained appearances. Nothing that required him to disappear into someone else's skin for years at a time. Radar, however, wasn't fully finished yet. Burghoff returned to the role for 2 episodes in the first season of After MASH, a quieter continuation that followed familiar characters into civilian life. That appearance spun off into Walter, a one-off project centered entirely on Radar adjusting to life back home. It aired once in the Eastern and Central time zones and then disappeared. No reruns, no second chances. Almost symbolic in how briefly it existed. By the 1980s, Burghoff was clearly pivoting away from acting as his primary identity. He became a television spokesman, lending his recognizable face to BP gasoline and IBM computers. Later, in 2000, he appeared again as a spokesman for PriceRadar.com during the dot-com boom. These weren't passion projects. They were practical, clear boundaries, no emotional bleed. Away from cameras, Burghoff leaned fully into the parts of himself that had existed long before Radar. He was a self-taught wildlife painter, specializing in detailed animal portraits. Not casually, seriously. He became qualified to handle injured wildlife in California, working hands-on with animals rather than just painting them. Quiet work, focused work. work that didn't involve being recognized in public or expected to perform sweetness on demand. Music remained another constant. Burghoff was a professional jazz drummer, leading a trio called the We Three. Then there was the inventor side of him. Burghoff held multiple U.S. patents, including one for chum magic, a fishing invention designed to attract fish toward a boat. He also patented a toilet seat lifting handle and developed a new type of fishing pole. He was also a philatelist, a serious one. In 1993, he was asked to help select a United States postal stamp for hunters. In 2010, he briefly stepped back in front of the camera to star in the independent film Daniel's Lot. It wasn't a comeback. There was no attempt to reclaim relevance. It felt more like closure. One last appearance on his own terms. His personal life followed a similar arc of intensity and reset. Burghoff married Janet Gale in 1971. They had one daughter before divorcing in 1979, the same year he finally stepped away from MASH. In 1985, he married Elizabeth Bostrom. They had 2 sons before divorcing in 2005. After that, Burghoff largely retreated from public discussion of his private life altogether. Radar O'Reilly taught audiences that gentleness could survive chaos. Gary Burghoff spent the rest of his life proving something quieter, that stepping away from the thing everyone associates you with can be an act of self-preservation. Who was your favorite character in MASH? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.